Hello, Dr. Siglas. So my unit was How Did the Lands Affect California Indians? So it was about California Indians. This is lesson 3, so the third lesson, Adapting to California Coast. So here's some background information about my class. Grade level, 3rd. Time frame, 45 minutes. This was simplified down to, I believe, 25-30 minutes due to parent conference week. Subjects, the English Standard, Social Studies, Science, and ELA. Topics, California Indians and the California Coast. The funds of knowledge. So some students do not know who California natives are. Some students have read or heard stories about Native Americans. Some students know that they themselves are part Native American, and I believe 2 students are part Native American. I believe one is Cherokee and one is Yoka. So it was nice for them to share, and the fact that they knew themselves that they were part Native American was really neat to know. These are the content area standards, of course, social studies standard, science, and ELA, and I will, social studies, of course, is the overall anchoring standard. So discuss the ways in physical geography, including climate, and so on, have influenced California natives. So we do have a lot of discussion going on throughout this lesson. Science as construct an argument with evidence in a particular habitat, how some organisms can survive well and can survive less. So this argument kind of goes with our new vocabulary word adaptation, because of course some animals need to adapt to the environment in order to survive. So some cannot survive well if they don't adapt, and some can survive well if they do adapt. ELA, write an informational/explanatory text to examine a topic. So in the end of the for their independent practice, they are writing a summary about the text that we read. So I begin the lesson by asking, have you ever read a book or heard stories of, California natives or California Indians? And of course, the students went up and shared what they have experienced, and I shared what I experienced. So not many students, again, were vaguely familiar with California Indians. And of course, the ones that are native, they are familiar. They've heard, stories passed down from generation to generation, and, they go to events and things and so on like that. So they knew, they had an idea of what California natives are. So I read the book Life of the California Coast Nations. And so we read this book halfway through, again, taking into consideration our time limit. So I only read it halfway, but I was able to, read it halfway and then go over it one more time as we needed to take notes. So again, this is the kind of the introduction, it is the introduction. So we've been learning about various Native Americans that lived throughout California. So that was like the kind of the first 2 lessons. Today we'll be reading about Native Americans that lived on the California coast. So this was more specific. So I asked them, do you remember any attributes or any elements from the coast? So they can tell me anything from the sand to the weather to the ocean, anything that they could remember from. We had previously visited the coast through a Google map. So I just wanted them kind of to jog their memory about the California coast. And I asked them, imagine living there a long time ago as a California Indian. So forget about, boogie boards, forget about, comfy towels. It was just you and their environment. And imagine living there thousands of years ago, and it was just you and the world. And I modeled the rule of 5, so this is how they were going to do their note taking. So the rule of 5 is to keep notes brief and straight to the point. For example, if a student said, oh, California natives got their food from the ocean, that's a little too long. So instead, they food from the ocean. So that's 4. It's under the rule of 5. So as we took notes, I asked them to look at the illustrations and analyze how different their environment looks from their idea of the California ghost. Again, kind of connecting that, well, California Indians didn't have beach towels to lay on, but we do. So I kind of wanted them to make this connection, how different the coast is, our version of the coast, to what California natives lived through. So this is an introduction to the vocabulary. So we reviewed 2 vocabulary words, climate and vegetation. This was from the previous lesson from the day before. I just wanted to jog their memory and see if they grasped those 2 vocabulary words, and I was not expecting them to have them memorized in any way. And then I introduced a new word, adaptation, and I gave them, this is a more lengthy definition, and together we created a more, a definition that they can actually understand better. And then after the definition, I gave them an example, because I've noticed if I do not give them an example, it's kind of hard for them to grasp the definition. So I gave the example, bears have fur to keep them warm throughout the winter. And then they kind of took this, and I asked them, can you identify other adaptations, whether it be an animal? And I got a lot of hands, wolves, butterflies, any animal, you name it, and they knew how these animals either adapted to their environment or adaptations that they have on their body. So as I read the story the second time, I periodically stopped and asked the students if they can identify how the California natives adapted. So I would have them turn around and discuss with a partner. Before that, I wanted to instill how to have a collaborative conversation, so it's not just, one-sided. So always look at the person that you're speaking to in the eye. Respect others by not interrupting. They have a tendency to, interrupt each other and be in mid-sentence. And then, so I can check for understanding, and so they can check each other for understanding. They repeated the ideas of their peers. For example, I said, bears have fur as an adaptation, and the person, if somebody was my partner, they'd say, you said that bears have fur as an adaptation, and then vice versa. So this is how they checked for understanding. This is how I checked for understanding as well. So the guided practice, of course, was the notes. I modeled the rule 5 example, food from the ocean. They analyzed and kind of pulled out the information. This information in the beginning, I modeled, so I gave kind of my findings. Natives lived along the coast for 10,000 years. They were fascinated by this. Then what California natives or tribes, the Chumash, the Miwok, the Ohlone. So I modeled how I was pulling out this information. So as we were going out, they would be able to identify and pull out this information the way I did it. So they weren't just like on their own, just grabbing any information. Independent practice. So this was the original idea. Students will independently write summaries of the story. So I will have a sentence frame. So like I said, this was originally just one sentence frame. But with the feedback from my mentor teacher, I ended up adding more than one, because they were having a hard time during previous lessons. The writing process was a little hard for them. It kind of on the spot. You kind of have to prepare them for writing. So I projected these sentence frames on the screen. And then I had one group that consisted of 3 students that kind of assist each other and kind of help each other create. I was gonna have them create the summaries, but just at this point, it was just kind of having them make sure each other are on track, and they're actually writing the words correctly, because they have a tendency of writing the words wrong, even though the words right in front of them. So kind of keep each other on track, and my mentor teacher was actually kind of a coach to them, kind of watching over as well. These are the sentence frames. So the first one is the book. So the book title. So who lived on the coast? So of course they have to remember California natives. California natives, and then this is where they insert the new vocabulary word. So they have to think back and, oh, what's the new vocabulary word? We went over it, right? Using, this is a part where they used what from the environment or what from around them. And some resources they used, so these, they were able to put any three of the tools that they found fitting or whatever they found interesting to them, and they can jot down three tools. So let's say, spears or weapons, baskets, boats. So it varied from student to student. And then California Indians use the natural blank from their environment. Again, this kind of reiterated the information from the previous sentence. So the natural materials or resources, either one was fine. And then after this, I verbally asked them, how did these resources help the Native Americans live their everyday life? And they were actually able to say that it helped them adapt to everyday life. And then I asked them, what is, adapt? Why do they need to adapt? And they were able to tell me they needed to survive where they lived. If they didn't adapt, they were not going to survive. So was in my, like, a very successful lesson, because my students were able to tell me, use the word adaptation or adapt and connect it to the survival of California natives on the coast. So I'm very proud that they were able to then make that connection. These are some student works. They highlighted certain parts of their work. And this is my closure. So I asked some questions that can be answered thumbs up, thumbs down, or sideways. Thumbs up is they either agree or they have an answer. Thumbs down, don't have an answer, I don't agree. And then if you're confused, of course, sideways. So did you like the story read today? Either thumbs up, thumbs down. Then I would pick a few students. Oh, why did you like it? And they would say, oh, I like the illustrations. I like the information. Is it important to learn how Native Americans adapted to their environment? Thumbs up, sideways, and say thumbs down. They don't think, I would say, oh, you don't think it's important? And they're like, maybe not, because they lived a long time ago. And I was like, okay, but although they lived a long time ago, they're still part of our history and California history. So they were the original people of California. So it's important that we do learn about them. How did California Indians adapt to the environment they lived in? And this was more of a kind of check for understanding, like, oh, I do know, I don't really know, or I don't know. So I had a few, I picked I picked one that had their thumbs up, and they were able to tell me, like, oh, they adapted by, using, getting fish from the ocean. A middle one, and they'd be like, I think they adapted by using grass to make tools. And I was like, oh yeah, okay, so tool, what kind of tools? And then I would give them examples and be like, oh yeah, a basket. So more, make them like a clear connection from like tool and like resource and like adaptation. Thumbs down. So usually a thumbs down is that she's one that she kind of needs a little bit more assistance to getting her words out. So we kind of all helped her out to kind of understand what were some adaptations. And then last one was like a nice fun one. What is more fun, fishing for dinner or going to the store? And of course, like a bunch of thumbs up. I did have a few thumbs out, and they thought, oh no, I wouldn't want to, fish for my dinner. That seems like boring or a lot of work. But I did have some fishers in the class, and they were really excited, and they were like, I'd rather have fish for my dinner. That's way more fun. And, instead of just going to the boring grocery store. So yeah, they really loved the last question. And again, I would say this was an overall successful lesson. my students were able to identify the different adaptations California Indians